We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Well, you're very welcome to join me on my YouTube channel today. This is Salcombe 1943. Salcombe was the main US Navy Advanced Amphibious Base, and around about that time there would have been a population increase of around about 2,000 servicemen. And the fleet of ships, landing craft, numbered around about 66, and they took over several hotels in the town. Hello, good morning and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Chris and we're here today at Mill Bay Sands in Salcombe, South Devon, and you can see behind me the concrete maintenance base for the United States Navy amphibious landing craft that were used in the early part of 1944 to carry out vital maintenance work. The Second World War had a dramatic impact on Salcombe. Many of its men and women went off to serve in the armed forces, but their departure was outweighed by an influx of refugees from France and Belgium, evacuees from London and other cities, and by the huge number of personnel based in and around Salcombe during the war. These included airmen and WAFs at the RAF Bolthead Airfield and the radar stations at West Brool, Bolt Tail and Hope Cove, as well as Royal Naval sailors in the harbour, and British Army soldiers serving in anti-aircraft artillery units. After September 1943, the numbers swelled considerably with the arrival of nearly 2,000 Americans at the US Navy Advanced Amphibious Base in the town. And by welcoming all these incomers, risking their lives as the bombs fell, and enthusiastically embracing civilian campaigns to support the war effort, Salcombe folk more than did their bit. Between 1939 and 1942, 5 RAF radar stations were set up on either side of the estuary to give early warning of German air raids. To the east, RAF West Brool, set up at the outset of the war, provided radar cover for the approaches to Exeter and Plymouth. West Brool was backed up by a remote reserve site on the coast near Praw Point. In 1942, the RAF set up another radar station above Start Point as part of the Chain Home Low system. This was taken over by the Americans in 1943. To the west of Salcombe, the RAF station RAF Bolt Tail was built in 1941, right at the edge of the cliffs on Bulbury Down. Closer to Salcombe, RAF Hope Cove, a ground control intercept station, was established in 1941 to assist in the tracking and interception of hostile aircraft after they crossed the coast, and this was located on the airfield at RAF Bolt Head. The entrance to Salcombe Harbour was guarded by a boom defence, and from July 1940 a gun battery in the grounds of the Bolt Tail, a private house above Splat Cove, and this mounted 2 4.7-inch naval guns, which were later replaced by 2 6-inch guns, which, according to Lieutenant Commander Frank Murch, were originally mounted in HMS Agincourt, a dreadnought battleship which had taken part in the Battle of Jutland in 1916. The site was manned by Royal Artillery soldiers from 391 Battery of 556 Coast Regiment, who were billeted at Bolt Head Hotel. The battery was handed over to the Home Guard in 1943, and the guns reduced to care and maintenance in 1944.
I was very, very, very frightened. We were young kids, really. Most of the boys were under 20. Was saying, wow, this is it. This is this great story, this great thing that we're going to be in. And we were so proud of being in it. On the other hand, we were scared as hell of being in it.
In one fell swoop, you ceased being a boy and you became a man.
Anybody says he doesn't feel fear is a damn liar.
I wish I had a good description of fear.
This was overwhelming. The sound, the sight of blood, the death of people, the screams. I saw men with their innards hanging out, screaming. Legs, arms, heads. It was a horrible sight. But we kept going.
The war and the memories of the fallen changed their lives forever.
They were the heroes. We were the survivors.
The Americans took over Salcombe Hotel and about 60 other properties and hotels, houses, garages and workshops. St Elmo Hotel became a hospital. Sandhills was used as an officers' club, Cliff House as a mess hall and for recreation and education. A vehicle park and repair depot were constructed on the site of the orchard at Gold's Farm and the adjacent Two Hoots car park. The narrow local lanes were often congested by heavy vehicles. At Whitestrand, in the centre of the town, 2 rows of derelict cottages were bulldozed to make a slipway and loading ramp. It became the main focus of activity, with fixed and mobile cranes working around the clock, equipping and repairing the small landing craft. Arc lights illuminated the quay at night, to the dismay of the locals, who were still subject to blackout regulations. At Shadicombe, rubble from the war-damaged houses was added to the town's domestic refuse, which had been dumped since before the war in a creek below the gasworks. On this, the Americans set up a fuel dump against the bank in a small floating dock in the creek. Another fuel depot was constructed at Snape's Point. The harbour soon filled up with all types of landing craft, including large landing ship tank craft, dubbed large slow targets by their crews, and landing craft tank. The slipway on Mill Bay was used to haul the LCTs out of the water for repair and maintenance. Whilst work was going on preparing the landing craft for D.Day, the 6th and 7th Beach Battalions practiced landings on beaches within the estuary, such as Fisherman's Cove, and also, of course, at Slapton Sands training area in Start Bay. A month later, on the 29th of September, the American Navy arrived in Salcombe to establish a USN Advanced Amphibious Base for the preparation of landing craft for the Normandy invasion. The first tasks of the CB construction group were to build hutted camps on the top of the hill for the 6th and 7th Beach Battalions and a landing craft repair slipway on Mill Bay. The base was officially commissioned in November 1943 when Commander William H. Hennessy, USNR, took over as commanding officer. He soon developed a close working relationship with the resident Royal Naval officer, Lieutenant Commander Francis Murch, Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, whose often repeated phrase was, "We're one Navy." By 1944, nearly 2,000 Americans were based in Salcombe, outnumbering the depleted population. The response of the locals to the virtual takeover of their town was positive. War-weary after 4 years of wartime shortages and restrictions, and with a constant threat from the air, the locals welcomed the Americans as a means of getting the job done. Although loud and high-spirited, particularly after drinking too much of the local rough cider, the Americans proved to be both polite and generous. Luxuries such as candy and chocolate were handed out to children who followed the men, and cans of fruit and meat found their way into many local homes. There were a few incidents involving unruly behaviour. On one occasion, tempers flared when the crews of both RN and USN ships met in the Ferry Inn. Shore patrols from both navies managed to get each group into different bars before sending them back to their ships. The crews marched out singing either "They'll Always Be in England" or "America." No charges were preferred by either side.
Until we got the order, start engines, unshackle the tanks.
My seasickness disappeared.
I mean, you could hear a pin drop. Honestly, there was, because everybody knew. So there was damn little conversation. But some of the guys, honestly, they had premonitions. Thank God I didn't have a premonition. They knew they were going. They knew they weren't going to make it.
A tremendous amount of noise. And of course, the English Channel was getting rougher each time because the ships, when they fired those guns, would cause the waves to occur.
Got 16-inch guns that were slinging shells out this side, and they went overhead like an express train. It sounded just like a train going over your head.
We were a 6-inch gun cruiser, which meant we could get quite relatively close to the shore. And our target was the gun emplacement on the shore. And what happened is one of our shells went through the embouchure, didn't hit the concrete, went right inside. And it exploded. It blew that whole turret into pieces no bigger than a motor car. And they're still there amongst the grass. And that's why they called it the luckiest shot. But we always said it was the most accurate.
As we went into the beach, we had the enemy artillery firing at us, and it was going over our heads. The noise was just horrendous. It was hell for everybody. It was something that none of us had ever been trained to experience. It was something that you quickly accepted because you had a job to do.
God, there's France. Wow, we're going to be there. We're going to go in. All of a sudden, the rockets started going off, and the battleship started bombing, and I'm saying, my God, what is going on? This is incredible, guys. You know, well, I hope to God I live long enough to remember it so I can tell somebody about it. It was amazing. It was a cacophony of sound that I'll never forget. I could feel it, every sound of it, right now as I'm talking to you.
It was just a mess. Smoke, dirt, noise, more noise than you can imagine. Even stories that our father had told us about the First World War, I don't think compared with the noise that we went into.
As we're circling, all 4 of our boats was knocked off by 88s and by mines. My boat was hit, was blown up in the air. All I remember is hitting my head against the bulkhead. But it hit us on the right-hand side, and the boat went over this way. So my head, you know, went this way. And that's when I cracked my skull, and I had a big shell fragment in my shoulder.
So there's a horrible greasy sound from the bottom.
But then you could realise that it hit something, and then the front went up to the forward part of it.
I really hope you found this short film of some interest. It's a very personal... it's very personal for me because my father served in the 13th and 18th Hussars, and he was there in Northern Europe in late 1944, right through to the cessation of the onslaught and the war in 1945. He was in a Sherman Firefly tank, and he finished up in Bremen as part of the Liberation Force of Bremen. He survived, but the horrors of being 5 men cooped up in a steel tank for months on end. He was never quite the same person when he returned after the war. I was born 10 years after 1944, and sadly he passed away in 1964 when I was 10 years old.